Time to check in with Chris Dimakos. He's our CJAD legal contributor. So, Chris, I was talking about this just the other day. There's a new bill in Quebec. It's Bill 72. It involves tipping, but it also involves stuff going on in grocery stores, grocery products. Now, I'm not familiar with what this is because you said this came up in French media the other day. So what's this about this bill that came up?
Yeah, so basically what they're talking about is just they had this media chain that went into a grocery store, a well-known grocery chain in the South Shore, and basically some of the shoppers that were complaining that some of the products on the shelves were imported from the Orient, and the writing on the packaging wasn't in French, and some of the descriptions weren't in French. So they basically said that the shoppers were saying they're going to complain to the language police, saying, "Hey, we should have every packaged product in a grocery store should be in French, and we shouldn't have Mandarin or English or any of the other stuff being on these packages." So it brought up the whole argument of, what is the OQLF doing about these products that are imported from other countries and are finding themselves on the grocery store. So that's basically what the story was talking about, and how the OQLF is going to deal with this, especially when it comes to imported products. And we're reviewing now how the new laws in place that we've had with the amendments to the French language charter, how they apply to these types of products.
Okay, I'm sitting here shaking my head. So these products are coming from Asia, right? And you would think they have an appeal, obviously, for people who might be from there as well, who enjoy buying those kinds of products. Is the thinking here there should be none of that writing on these packages at all, or just that they include French over and above? Well,
so there's when we talk about the thinking, there's the shoppers that were interviewed. Now, this might be the minority there, but the ones that they found said that they want to have just French writing on the packaging. But the law, the Charter of the French language, does provide exceptions to the rule. Like, for example, if you have a trademark name that's in English, well, then you're allowed to have that on the packaging. Now, if you start getting into the descriptions about the product, well, then, it has to be in French. But there are also exceptions. Now, I'm not sure how this is going to play out, if indeed it is addressed, but there are exceptions for cultural-based products and things that are to particular regions. So it's not an absolute that every single product has to be in French. Now, I would imagine that they're going to lean towards having these packaged products that are coming from Asia have some French writing on them. But the story here is basically what is the essence of the Charter of the French language? It's to protect the language. And the question is, how far do you go? Like, at what point does the legal interpretation end up being futile? Like, are we really accomplishing our objective here if we're going to a small section of groceries in an area where you might have a high number of people from a certain region in the world living in that area, and they might want certain products that have them in? So this is what it's going to come down to. And obviously the OQLF, they're probably going to lean towards having more French than less French, but if there's a debate to be had, it's going to be on whether or not there are any cultural exceptions for these types of products.
Okay, so let me go, because we're talking about the OQLF, and this sort of falls under their mandate. We also found out today there's a new poll or a new survey out that shows that complaints, to the OQLF are at basically, I think, all-time highs. Now, and I know we've talked about this before, but what's interesting to note is for all these complaints and all the increasing complaints, there were just a handful of fines actually assessed, which kind of begs the question again of, let's say you're in a position where there is a complaint made against you, that goes to the OQLF. You don't know who made it because, of course, we know the law has now changed to allow you to make an anonymous complaint, which in and of itself is concerning. But is it legal to do? So if you don't know who's filed that complaint and you're the business being sort of held out here, what recourse do you have?
Right. So it's a great point. First of all, in our justice system in Canada, usually, in most cases, if somebody accuses you of something, you have the right not only to defend yourself, but to know who's making the complaint and who's making those accusations. Because if you don't know, it almost deprives you of the ability to defend yourself adequately, right? So knowing who it is and understanding the circumstances of where these complaints came from helps you. But that being said, what you're saying essentially, I think, is what many people want to know is the way it's set up. It's more like, I know I'll get in trouble for this, but it's like the only thing worse than a referendum or a decision to separate is just talking about it. Because when you talk about it, well, then people make decisions based on that, and companies don't invest because of the talking about it. But sometimes it's actually better just to go through with it. And in your example here, where we have complaints at an all-time high, but actual fines that are giving out are not corresponding. They're not rising at the same level. That's just because of the impression of what the OQLF's mandate is, and what someone can just be upset that there's the English word on a package, but legally they're allowed to have that English trademark on the package. So what the perception is and what the legal reality is are two different things. And what we're suffering from now in this province is there's a perception out there, and people are acting on that perception and not the reality. And the consequence, the one who pays for that, is the business who's trying to make money, is having to deal with these I guess unrealistic views on what the language laws are in this province, and they have to spend money and consult with lawyers and do all of this because of this misperceived mandate of what it means to protect the French language and how far it goes. And sometimes you have to take a step back and say, what exactly are we doing here? Are we arguing over a product in the corner of a grocery store that was imported for a certain part of the population? Is that what we're doing here? Because if you think about it, it almost becomes like, hey, I think we've lost the essence of why we have these language laws in our province.
By the way, that number, 9,125 complaints, that's in 2023, 2024, largest increase in a single year. But again, to what I brought up at the beginning, right, we know very few of them have actually been prosecuted or fined. If you're that person, though, Chris, and someone has decided, it could even be a competitor, and that's the whole idea, but not knowing who your accuser is, what is your option in court? I know most people would simply say, I pay the fine and walk away, but it's beginning to seem like that just is not enough. So what can you do?
Well, the thing is, what most companies do, and there's principle, and then there's the financial aspect of defending yourself. So what most companies have done, and the ones that I've spoken to, when they get these types of issues, the first thing you do is, hey, am I wrong? Do I have to change something? Is there something that I'm doing here that I shouldn't be doing? And they get an opinion on that. And if the answer is, you're doing nothing wrong, you're respecting the law, everything that you've done here checks off in terms of the language laws and the charter of the French language. Well, the next question is, okay, so is this going to be a repetitive thing? Do I, if I pay the fine now, am I going to get more fines, or is it a one-off that I won't see again? And then they have to judge whether or not they want to defend themselves. And most companies, business owners, are usually proud people. They've worked really hard to get where they are. They take on a lot of risk. They made a lot of sacrifice. And most of them say, you know what, I know it's going to cost me more money to defend myself, but based on who I am, the values I have, I'm going to defend myself. But it's not a fair system just because the person making the complaint has no skin in the game. Right. They can do so anonymously, and they can walk away from it, and then they go about their day. And then the business owners are stuck trying to figure out how to deal with the situation. So you're absolutely right. The way the system is set up is extremely disadvantageous for the business owner who's trying to make a living and trying to operate in our province.
And that's where we're going to leave it, unfortunately. Chris, thanks so much. Always appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron.